looking at HD's poem Sea Rose, right? Sea Rose, which is held up as a classically good instance of imagism at its birth. You know, it's like one of the first great Imagist poems. And the question's going to be this, following from what Dave just said about Amy Lowell and Amy's feeling, like an aesthetic feeling, to be sure, a radical aesthetic feeling, like we should be doing this kind of radical condensation, and this kind of focus, and this kind of precise word choice as opposed to Victorian gloop. And when HD did that, she immediately fell into what some people would call the trap of creating a programmatic statement in a poem that was meant to be anti-programmatic. So I'd love for 4 people just to comment on Sea Rose as 2 things. I think Sophia Hall brought this up. Somebody brought this up in our class. It's both an Imagist poem in the sense that it is just about the sea rose, but it is also about what you can do in a poem to make it just about a sea rose, if you know what I mean. So it's got a meta quality. So who are the 4?
Jason, Kate, Max, and Lainey.
Jason, Kate, Max, and Lainey. Okay, let's have brief comments from each on that question of Sea Rose. Jason with Kate on deck.
Oh, could you repeat? Just so, is it a matter of the form?
When you, yeah, I'm happy to. I didn't ask the question very well, Jason. So thanks for clarifying. When you read Sea Rose, you think, "Oh, this is a new kind of poem in 1912 or whenever it was written. This is a new kind of poem. It's only about the sea rose. It is not about large issues. You know, it's not theoretical. It is not programmatic. It is just about the sea rose. It was so successfully about the sea rose that people immediately used it as a programmatic poem. And the question is, how do you read a poem now thinking, oh my gosh, this launched a program. It's a theory. It's also anti-Victorian. She didn't want the sea rose to be anti-anything. She wanted just to do a sea rose. Does that make any sense?
Yeah, totally. And I was looking at, I'm answering the question, but like a new poem I think that's in ModPo Plus is the Williams poem. What is it? The Flowers by the Sea.
Oh, I love that poem. Good example. Yeah, same thing.
It's a gorgeous poem. But they're like, they're that I actually think that poem that comes closer to what we're describing, what you're describing.
Yes.
But because Sea Rose, in a way, is the what it feels like it's trying to do is to get away from metaphor or
yes,
but it's not, like, in order to really be as, I mean, it's almost like that poetry is, in a sense, trained us to look for more than there is.
Yes, exactly.
So even the way we read in ModPo, to kind of look for other layers embedded below the icing.
Good. All right, let me pause you there, and let's go to Kate to keep the story going here. Kate, followed by Max on deck.
Well, in my office hour yesterday, we looked at this poem side by side with, I believe it's called Sheltered Garden, which is an HD poem in ModPo Plus. And Terry Talty for us stripped all of the I statements and the editorial statements out of Sheltered Garden and sort of stripped the poem down to something that looks a lot like Sea Rose. And it was really interesting to see how when you strip out the I and the editorial, you have a poem that feels extra metaphorical and extra sort of statement heavy. So, you know, she may be trying to strip things down to the thing in itself, but she's created this hunkin' metaphor by way of doing that.
Oh, that's so perfectly observed. And the question becomes, can you ever have a poem that is simply anti-metaphorical, anti-symbolic, and simply a poem in which words are either pointing to things precisely, semi-precisely, not precisely, but they are all indexical and they are not metaphorical? Can you do that? The answer is probably no, which is why Imagism was such a failure ultimately, because they actually believed for 10 months that they could do it. And then that was in 1913, and that was the end of it. And Amy Lowell in 1927 was still pounding away at that. She kept putting out anthologies, Imagist anthologies, from 1930, and no one was doing it anymore. So that's the problem of any kind of programmatic poetry. I'm looking at Lainey, who has been in the poetry biz for a long time and has seen these kinds of movements come and go. Going to Max, but before we do, and Max with Lainey on deck, before we do, Chris, is there someone on the phone ready to talk? No, okay. Max, thoughts on this whole question? It's an interesting one.
Yeah, we had a version of this conversation in my office hours yesterday when we were discussing Flowers by the Sea. And we talked a bit about this tension that we see in these Imagist poems between this desire for something like pure representation of an image free of any sort of extra connotation or value judgment, and then also, but at the same time, the difficulty that these poets have not to incorporate some kind of universalizing statement or judgment about the image they're trying to represent. And here in this poem in particular, I think you get that in the second stanza with more precious than a wet rose. Immediately, like, HD is not content to just try to describe the sea rose. She needs to let you know that this sea rose is a more interesting poetic object than the wet rose single on a stem, the sort of more traditional rose, right? Yeah. And so she's advancing her program, but also immediately undoes what Imagism is supposed to do, because she can't just let the image be.
Yeah, that's so well put. A quick question for you, Max, and we'll turn to Lainey. Can you name some other art forms that don't so easily fall into this trap?
That don't so easily
that do not so easily fall into the trap of, oh, I read that poem and it's about life and nature and human resilience and shit like that. Is there another art form where you just don't so automatically go to those interpretations?
I think music and visual arts, because they have different. I mean, their forms of representation are different. I mean, music is often it evokes, but without imagery.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Without semantics. And
without semantics. I mean, it can do it. You're a musician. I'm glad you brought up music. It can do it. A certain kind of music can cause you not to draw large conclusions, but to listen to the tone, to the pitch, to the volume, and get a feel for the sound. Painting is a little more problematic, because if you're doing any kind of pictorialism, any kind of representation or anything that somebody can say, oh, I see a cloud there, and the painter steps out from behind the curtain and says, no, it's not a cloud, it's paint on canvas. I love that whole problem of poetry, because it's language, and we are sadly caught in language's denotative work that it does in the world. Right? So if you see green on the street, you think, I can go. But what if it's just green? What if it doesn't tell you to go or stop? Lainey, your thoughts on this?
Well, I love what you're saying about music, and I thought about music immediately as well. And I think when we get into some of the later weeks, we'll see how language that's really sound before denotative meaning we can in language. So I had a quick thought about this poem, and then I wanted to just signal what's happening in the chat.
I would love for you
about
to do
this
that.
poem.
Yes.
But my first thought is that HD cannot, whatever she makes spare, she can't remove her own preferences from the poem. So her
subjectivity will out.
Her preference for the wild rose as opposed to the cultivated rose, and all the connotations of conventional beauty with the cultivated rose. She prefers the wild. So even she's just writing about a rose, but even in just choosing the subject, that preference is there. And then there's some great stuff in the chat.
Yes, read some of it, please.
So Paul Kelly said, I think the sea rose is profoundly anti. The sea rose is superior to the cut rose and the spice rose. The poem is consciously structured as a critique. And then Suzanne says, I disagree about the sea rose. I don't think it's anti-Victorian. I think all of the levels of description are like Victorian ornament. And then...
Ooh, wow, fighting words, Suzanne Miller from South Carolina.
Talk about reading across intertextuality. Miranda Jubb writes, I was looking into the poet Callie Gardner, Al mentioned in a recent email. And by the way, we just did a poem talk with Ian that will be released sometime.
Months from now.
And she writes, and found a brilliant essay by them, Callie Gardner, on HD's Sea Violet. I would recommend anyone interested to read Very ModPovian. If anyone has the link to that essay and can stick it in the chat, that would be fabulous.
Yes, we'd love to have that, Miranda Jubb. We would totally love to
Thank
have
you.
that because I think we can add it.